of cold water cases. The speaker series brought to you by the Cape Long Distance Swimming Association. The CLDSA promotes and supports long distance swimming around the Cape. Membership is just 300 Rand, and for this you get support on your swim, discounts to the Cold Water Cape Swim Series, the new swim series, and occasional coaching discounts, as well as free tickets to the speaker series, and of course our Newsy monthly newsletter. So if you haven't joined, most of you are members, but if you haven't joined, then it's worth a go. Membership starts on the 1st of July. So today we have a new format. We'll be having a panel discussion with 3 well-known members of the swimming community. The 3 are well-known also in their respective medical fields. First up is Dr. Sean Gottschalk. He's a specialist emergency physician based in Cape Town. Sean has extensive experience working with cold water and ice swimmers, both locally and abroad. This includes numerous Robben Island open water crossings and ice swim events in South Africa, Lesotho, Antarctica and Russia. He has also participated in high altitude swim world record expeditions in both the Himalayas and also the Andes. So welcome, Dr. Sean.
Thanks very much.
Put your video on there. Thanks, nice to have you. Next up, we have Annelie Smith. She's a registered dietitian, has worked with many sports enthusiasts and elite athletes over the years to help them optimize their nutrition for performance and health. She has specialized in nutrigenomics and functional nutrition for many years and heads up mentoring at 3x4 Genetics. Nutrigenomics looks at an individual's genetic makeup and biochemical markers, as well as environmental exposures, to compile a truly personalized treatment plan. Welcome, Annelie.
Thanks. Hi, Tom.
And lastly, we have Neil Hopkins, also well known in the swimming community. He's a registered biokineticist working in private practice in Cape Town. He's also an adjunct lecturer at UCT in the Department of Exercise Science and Sports Medicine. Neil loves his water sports. He's a swimmer, surfer, water polo player, and he's also qualified as a swimming coach. So I think today he will be not only talking to us as being a swimmer, but he'll also be talking to us as both a biokineticist as well as a swimming coach. So to complete the picture along with our doctor and our dietitian. So today's topic is preparing for a long swim. For some, that might be a 7.5 kilometer Robben Island crossing. For others, that might be as much as an English Channel, maybe further, I don't know, maybe a Molokai Channel. We will be chatting together for about 30 to 40 minutes, after which we'll take some questions. So in the chat area of Zoom, you can put in your questions, and please, we will go through them and we'll see what we can do getting to those questions towards the end of the chat. So apologize in advance if we don't get to ask your question. We are going to be a little bit limited for time. Okay, so I thought we'd just start with, on the diet side. Annelie, how important is diet to swim preparation?
So for me, it's obviously one of the most important things. It's probably one of the most neglected things, I think, because we sort of pay so much time, we pay so much attention to getting fit and all the swims we have to do that we sometimes forget about the nutrition. I know I do, even with what I'm doing. So, and also because it's so hard to feed when you do open water swimming, it is actually something that's quite hard to get right. All right.
And so, I mean, we're talking about both the heavy training, the period of heavy training, what sort of diet, what sort of supplementation in your diet do you need at that stage? What sort of things should you be looking to introduce into your diet? And then obviously just before a swim, or what should you be feeding on the day before a swim? How is this different to one's everyday diet?
So I think you must always think about this. The nutrition will fill a few things. So one of the things is that it helps you to train better, because it will help you to prevent injuries if you have the right nutrition. So there you have to make sure you get enough protein and minerals specifically for your collagen health, so you can train. And also then when you're training a lot, especially building up to an event and wanting to peak properly, your nutrition is going to be extremely important for you to recover. So there's 3 things nutrition has to give. One of the things would be hydration. So I think we also, because we're surrounded by water, we sometimes forget about hydration, and it can really impact your performance. So that's something that's really important. And of course, if you train in a pool, you can sip stuff in between, but if you're in the open water, you can get quite dehydrated. But then the other things would be burning something for fuel. So your carbohydrates important, and also protein to some extent. And then the third thing is the nutrients that actually help you burn things. So these are mostly things like B vitamins, but there's other things that helps your mitochondria, which burns the energy to really make that energy. So we must remember there's all these things that needs to go into that. So things like, for me, the things that are most important are things like magnesium, B vitamins, carnitine is also quite good for generating energy. And then in terms of what you can eat, so you don't only just want to live on supplements. So things you can eat are the things that also help your body deal with the stress. So when you're burning a lot of oxygen, you are creating a lot of oxygen that can cause damage, and that causes inflammation, and that inflammation causes fatigue. So the foods you want to eat are the things that help to reduce the inflammation and the oxidative stress, really, that makes you tired. And so think of being careful of things like lots of sugars, things that's going to cause inflammation, and then the veggies, so things like beetroot and green leafy vegetables and all those lovely things we eat as our after-race meals, which I know we don't. So that is really important. So if you're really training hard, and you especially take care of what you're eating after you've been training to help reduce that inflammation and oxidative stress, that's really important for your cellular health.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so obviously diet, very important. And a dietitian obviously can play a very important role there. Neil, over to you. What is the role of a bio when it comes to something like swim preparation for a long swim?
So from a biokinetics perspective, it's a tricky one, because the role of the bio is multifactorial. I don't know why my video is not showing here. There we go. So there are many roles that a bio can play. You could see a bio if you wanted to look at the injury side of things. So if you're injured, you can see a bio to work on the niggles that you're experiencing. If you're not an injured person, so I think most swimmers do carry a little bit of an ache and pain from time to time, but if you're not injured, you can also see a biokineticist for high performance conditioning. And that applies to your average Joe like myself, or an elite person as well. So if somebody wants to be more competitive, they could also see a biokineticist to go through some exercises and a structuring of an exercise program that can kind of complement your swimming. There's no getting away from it. You have to swim, you have to spend time in the pool. But the reality is that you could see a biokineticist to get an exercise training program that will help you work on the weaknesses that you may have in the water. So if you're not doing your pull properly, if you're not finishing off with your pull, you can come up with an exercise routine that would finish that part strong and get you conditioned for that. If you're not mobile in your upper back, and that prevents you from getting a good reach, you can also work on that. So it's a tailor-made way of getting a program, seeing a biokineticist to run through your particular needs that you may have. You also can see there's a lot of content online, which is fantastic. There are a lot of programs that are becoming available thanks to the pandemic. I think a lot of people have realized that the digital scape is an important area to be in. But you can download programs online. For the person who wants a little bit more bespoke training, then reach out to see a biokineticist. So if you're not making progress with an online program, which is the cheapest, easiest option to go for, reach out for somebody who's qualified, who can actually help you out with that.
So are we talking, are there bios that are swimming specialists, or are generally bios well-trained in all sorts of disciplines? Should one seek out somebody who's more familiar with swimming challenges and problems?
It's a fair question. I think it comes up with any sport, really. I mean, you've got bios who've got a passion for rugby, but they may never have played Springbok rugby, so they would never be able to see a Springbok rugby player if that ad applied. So I think that you do have bios who've got a special interest in sport. I can name a couple of them because they're passionate about swimming. They might be able to assist you as a swimmer. So they'll know what you go through when you're swimming your lengths. They know what swim sets feel like. They know the discomfort that you go through as a swimmer and the mental toughness. So they may have an added benefit in terms of being able to assist you, but I don't think it's imperative that you necessarily have a swimmer as a biokineticist. I think you need to have a good clinician, somebody who knows how to assess injuries, somebody who knows biomechanics and is good with like creating exercises for you. Because it's a problem-solving approach. So having a cookie-cutter mold and having the same program, you might as well go to Dr. Google. If you want kind of an injury that's not responding favorably, then you might want to reach out to somebody who is specialized in orthopedics, somebody who is knowledgeable in swimming, because then it might fine-tune the kind of the niggle it won't resolve.
Okay, great. So Dr. Sean, we've looked at now the roles of a dietitian and a bio within the swimming preparation. What role, if any, does a doctor have if you're preparing for a long swim?
Yeah, I think there are definitely a couple of roles for prepping for long swims. I think firstly is one's general health. So people who are on chronic medication, thyroid meds, could be anything. They need to get that completely sorted out with their GP or physician as part of their general health and training. And for very long swims or for very high risk swims, ice, water, altitude, etc., swimmers need to have medicals. And that's not just to clear them for the swim, but to make sure that they're safe. And then, of course, anything else that comes up, be it acute injuries, fractures, major medical problems, COVID like that, they need, swimmers need advice from professional doctors before the swim. And then if they're having problems during swims regularly, they also need to get a consultation, be that nausea, headaches, etc. So I do think there's a role, together with some of the other clinicians that you brought onto this panel.
So yeah, I think we've talked a little bit about swimming with niggles, and obviously a bio can play a role there. And I'd like to sort of touch on one's general health. Maybe we'll go through the full panel, but swimming with a cold, is it a good idea?
Yeah, so this is an ongoing debate that's been going on for decades. And basically the general rule of thumb has been if one has, for example, a little bit of sinusitis or rhinitis, runny nose, but no general symptoms, one can generally train, but shouldn't do heavy stuff. You don't want to enter your English Channel swim while you're ill. And what one needs to look for is systemic symptoms. So in other words, if you have a fever or raised heart rate or feel general fatigue, then you're starting to enter the risk zone. And the real risk, be it training or the actual major swim day, is one set oneself up for a myocarditis, basically inflammation of the heart, and that can lead to quite nasty problems, heart attacks, etc. And yeah, experienced clinicians who work with sports people will strongly advise against doing any major swim or training whilst one is ill, and that's especially true for COVID.
So COVID, obviously big topic. I think I've struggled a little bit with supplements, symptoms after my COVID, and struggling to get into the cold water and all that sort of thing. What sort of symptoms have you experienced from other swimmers following their diagnosis of COVID, and what sort of challenges does COVID bring up when it comes to getting back into training?
So COVID is tricky because there's a huge range. So when people are ill, the range is from feeling nothing to landing up in ICU, and that's part of the problem. But what most of the swimmers have found when they're ill and when they're training, it's a bit like being at altitude. You feel okay until you do something, and then you're completely winded, you have no energy. And what that reflects into actual practical terms is that when you're training, you need to build up over a much longer period than normal. So something that would normally take you a couple of weeks may take you months. And that's there you get into the role of working with if you have a coach and or sports physician, to build up in a safe way without getting some of the injuries that I was talking about, particularly inflammation of the heart.
And how does, if anything, what can one do to keep a strong immune system when training? I mean, it's the Olympics now, and there's lots of talk around getting Olympians to peak at the right time, and they don't want to get sick just before their big event. So how does one maintain a strong immune system if one's heavily training? Is there anything one can do from your side?
I think just in general terms, and then maybe the dietitian can get in as an expert in that. But from my side, overtraining is part of the problem. One's immune system does become weak. And there one really has to work with the coach to decide what is overtraining. One's always pushing myself in training. If you push too hard, you're going to weaken the immune system. A good diet, including vitamins, and the vitamins now in particular being used for COVID are vitamin C, D, and zinc. So that may be part of the program together with magnesium, but just generally a good balanced diet. One doesn't need to use huge amounts of vitamins. One just generally pees them out and not overtraining and weakening one's immune system together with a balanced lifestyle. That includes a good amount of sleep, this type of thing.
So Annelie, yeah, I mean, following on what Dr. Sean said, what role does nutrition play in keeping a strong immune system and keeping you away from being sick during heavy training?
Yeah, I agree with you completely, Sean. I think one of the biggest things would be overtraining, but I guess we all have that sweet spot where we are having to do certain training and then having to know when are we overtrained and when are we undertrained. So I guess with nutrition, at least that's one thing that you have a lot of control over, that you can make sure that you are eating well and that you're eating regularly. So for me, so when you exercise, you're actually activating your immune system. So that helps. So it's like a weak stressor. So we start activating our immune system. So that's a good thing and why exercise is good. But we want to keep our immune system balanced. So the things that are for acute viruses, like something like vitamin C, we know it's antiviral, the zinc is quite popular, but be careful with single nutrient dosages. That's quite important to remember. If you take mega dosages of one nutrient, it can cause problems in other areas. So for instance, vitamin C is okay if you may be fighting something to take it, but I wouldn't suggest that you're taking it constantly because it's got its problems of its own. Because it's exercise actually helps your immune system to work better. And if you take vitamin C, it almost puts a damp on it. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Then something like zinc, if you take too much zinc, it actually impacts copper, which is they work in a certain ratio. So it's okay again to take zinc when you're feeling sick, but you need to be careful to take big dosages constantly. And in vitamin D, we know that vitamin D is really, really important for our immune system. We all get some sunlight, so we know we get vitamin D, but some of us do maybe don't have enough vitamin D in terms of genetics. Some people need more than others. So that is good. But then I also like things like omega-3 fatty acids. So that really helps to balance your immune system. And then there's some herbals, like my personal favorites are things like a bit of ginseng or rhodiola, which helps to your body cope with stresses and it helps to balance your immune system.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, just moving on a little bit, similar topic, but injury. I think you mentioned it before, Annelie. But I just want to ask Neil around injury avoidance and what role things like strength training can play with things like injury avoidance. I mean, we talked about a good diet that plays a role, but obviously from a strength training perspective, is that something that we can do to avoid injury?
So I think that the holy grail of science in sports medicine is trying to find something that mitigates risk of injury. I don't think you can ever prevent injury 100%. You can find that there's certain exercises you can implement that can reduce the risk of injury, but preventing it 100% is not something that's going to be possible. So adding in strength training has been shown to assist swimmers with their swimming performance, but it can also help with reducing the risk of injury. Therein lies the conundrum, is how much strength training and what strength training. I think it comes down to individual biases and personal preference. The idea is that your strength training shouldn't steal from your swimming. That's the most important thing. So if you're getting injured in the gym, it's silly. You're going to potentially get injured doing your sport. Repetitive strain injuries are very common with swimmers, but you shouldn't be getting a repetitive strain injury from your gym training. So that's something you've got to weigh up in terms of priorities. What is important to you? Is it important that you are a swimmer, or is it important that you're doing some crazy new fad of exercise? So pick your battles wisely. And then the most important thing with injury prevention would be your plan, actually knowing where you're going, if it's an event that you're training towards, or even if you're an average Joe, just having a variety in your training program, so that everything isn't vanilla, that you've got different flavors. So there's strawberry, there's chocolate, that week on week it has some variety. The body loves variety. If you give it monotony and it's the same set, the same routine, the same swim squad, and nothing changes, it's not good for your adaptation. So you're not going to improve fitness wise. You'll meander along, so you'll plod along and you'll maintain your fitness. But if you really want to improve, you need to have variety, and that's where your strength training can come in. So in the off season, adding in a lot more strength training, and then as you get into the season, then you start petering away on the strength training. You're still doing it once a week just to maintain, but it's important to have a plan and times and seasons. Okay, not just the same thing right throughout. I think that's the best thing in terms of looking at injury risk reduction. And I think there's Tim Gabbett is a scientist. He's come up with a paradigm training harder and smarter. And I think that we need to train hard as athletes. If we're going to be swimming long distances, you need to train hard. It's not that something you can just jump in and start swimming Robben Island. You have to put in some hours of effort. But I think that you need to train hard, but then also be smart about it. And a nice analogy that I came across recently was a traffic light. And if you look at your traffic light, green, amber, and red, and you use pain as a guide. So they'll say if you're on green, it's 1 to 3 out of 10 in terms of pain. If you're on yellow, it's going to be a 4 to a 6 out of 10. And then if it's a 7 to a 10, then you're in the red zone. So green means you can jump into the pool, and if you've got that 1 to 3 level, you can kind of carry on swimming and it's okay. If you're in the yellow zone, it's time to reach out to a professional for help. So if it's an acute injury, off to the physiotherapist, get an assessment, get some rehabilitation from them, and then progress onto the biokineticist. And if it's red, definitely go get it checked out by a sports physician or a doctor or even a physiotherapist. Okay, get yourself checked out. Don't try push through on the red zone. Yellow, it's knocking at the door, and it's kind of like it's the same niggle keeps coming back. If your back is sore every time you go for a swim set and it's knocking on the door of the yellow zone, go get some help and get it seen to, and then you can add in some strength training to work on that.
Okay, and then sort of similar topic, but I think everyone who's done a long swim can talk to perhaps their stroke falling to pieces at some stage during the swim. How does one resist, I think, the term stroke fatigue? How does one resist that as far as possible? Obviously, I think we're all prone to it eventually, but how does one stay as strong as possible, apart from perhaps just training ridiculous number of kilometers just to be fit enough?
So the old way of training was just to do ridiculous kilometers. I think now it's shifted more to more sensible coaching. So there's some fantastic coaches in Cape Town, and I think you should reach out to some of the coaches that are out there that can help you with your stroke technique. And then stroke drills, those are very, very important. And I think that if you're just jumping into the Sea Point Pavilion pool and you're plodding out in 13-degree, 14-degree water, what's it at the moment? But if you're plodding out and you're just doing freestyle and you're not really working on your technique, it's going to work on your mental toughness, that's for sure, but it doesn't really help your stroke that much. So I think a combination of strength training, working on your weaknesses. So if you're not finishing your pull, coming up with some gym exercises that'll work on that. If you're not getting a high elbow recovery, whichever your choice is, if that's your stroke of choice, work on techniques that'll increase mobility, so it's not working against a rubber band. Especially the triathletes and people who swim in wetsuits, working on upper back flexibility, so mobility, and then shoulder range of motion to counteract the fact that you are swimming in a rubber band and it's a lot harder in terms of shoulder work. But yeah, in terms of reducing that fatigue, it is training, but it's doing the right kind of drills to work on that endurance, and then complementing that with specific gym exercises, not just hoping that bicep curls are going to get it for you or tricep push downs. You've got to work on things that are specific towards your potential shortcomings and your potential weaknesses.
Okay, and how does one peak on the day? How does one ensure that one is, and how does one avoid overtraining as well?
By working backwards. So knowing what the event is that you're working towards. And I know sometimes like the weather is just amazing and you kind of just want to jump in the water and swim like a fantastic swim because the weather's just happened to be ideal on that particular day. But pick your battles. So find an event that you really want to train towards and then work backwards from there. So in the week of the swim, you need to swim. I think sitting on dry land is not fun, and mentally it's important that you swim. But the reality is you shouldn't be going and doing a crazy load of training the week before. So panic training. And that used to happen. I mean, I was at varsity, we used to have water polo champs every December, and you'd find in the week before water polo champs, we were training 3 times a day, which is retarded. It's not scientific. So if you're going to look at peaking correctly, make sure you look at your taper week leading up to the event, and then work backwards from there. So it's going to be a balance of hard weeks and easy weeks, and it depends on your mix. You could have, when you're starting out, it could be a week, easy week, hard, easy week, hard. Then you could go easy too hard, and then eventually you could get to 1 easy week, 3 hard weeks. It depends on your coach. It depends on your training philosophy and what the event is. So the best thing is to work backwards and work with science.
Okay, great. Dr. Sean, is there any one of us that should not be doing cold water swimming, or is cold water swimming a sport for everyone?
Yeah, tricky question there. Thanks, Tom. And I think that's, there's no hard test for who can do cold water swimming and who can't. Very similar to somebody going to altitude. At this point, we only really know when somebody does it. But there are very clear patterns emerging where swimmers can certainly get better at cold water swimming, but there are some people that should not be doing it. And these are the guys that land up in the medical ICU area after every single swim and often get hospitalized. And they should take expert advice, and some of them should really not be doing cold water swimming. They should move to warm water swimming. The flip side is also true. In my career, I've treated a couple of cyclists who cannot cycle in the heat. They get heat stroke, it's dangerous. When they cycle in the cool weather, they're absolutely fine. So there is a range of what people can tolerate temperature-wise. They can acclimatize to a degree, but there are outliers that cannot tolerate either cold or heat extremes.
Okay. I'm going to move on a little bit to the swim itself. So let's talk about some of the things that can go wrong. So starting with you, Dr. Sean, some of the things that the risks of swimming in the ocean. I think we noted things like nausea, jellyfish stings, seasickness, and I think hypothermia as well. So if we just cover a little bit of that nausea and seasickness, how does one avoid that, or what sort of measures should one put in place to combat nausea and seasickness? Okay, sure.
Very common. And it affects one's performance, even from mild nausea up to literally throwing up. So the first thing that's been mentioned already is diet. And I think one really needs to get this right. Eating on the morning and during the swim, and practicing with that, because people do have quite wide preferences, but not just practicing in the swimming pool, practicing in the sea with the motion of the waves, and seeing what you can tolerate. And one does generally actually need to eat something. The yachtsmen are well versed in this. If your stomach's empty, it actually doesn't help. Plus, you're only burning reserve energy. So eat your food before and during the swim, and practice that before your big swim. The second thing is it's probably better to use earplugs, especially in very cold water. There's a medical reflex that we use on comatose patients called the cold caloric reflex, where cold water hits your ear and your eyes actually start flicking, called nystagmus. So if you're in the water, in very cold water, and cold water is now hitting your eardrum, that's actually going to make things worse. So that's something to think about and probably to practice. Less important in warm water, but cold water definitely. And then in terms of actual antiemetics, the medication, one needs to use medicine if you're going to get nauseous, and be aware that some things work much better than others. So something like Maxilon or metoclopramide does not work well at all for seasickness. So what works well are things like Valoid, Cinnarizine or Sturgeon. And again, one should practice with that, because sometimes these have side effects. So practice with it in the pool, then in the ocean. And if you're the type of person that gets nauseous in the open water, rather take it before. If you're going to start taking it halfway through your swim, you're probably too late. So yeah, take it on the morning before you swim. So those are just some of the tricks to use for nausea.
Okay, thanks. So we'll move on to Annelie. What about feeding on a swim? How does one find out what food one is best for somebody on a swim? And is it different for everybody, or should we all look to feed on the same thing?
Look, it's probably different. There are some differences, but there's a few basic things. So I think the most important thing is definitely try and eat before. I know we're all nervous, especially if you have to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning or something, or you haven't slept well, so you're all nervous. So I think it's also important to maybe like rice, start right before. I have to make sure you have a good meal the night before. So that's important. And then when you have a meal, the first meal, you have to have something that digests fairly easily, because if you're nervous and you're stressed, you're not going to digest that food. And then when you on your way to your swim is to have some sort of liquid which you've tried before, which you can sip on, which is going to keep you hydrated and maybe give you some more nutrition. So I personally feel like what I do before my swim leading up to it is quite important. And then during the swim, like Sean said, it's important to try and practice these things, because there's so much more than just in the pool. So it's a good idea to maybe have some gel stuck in your costume. I know we all do that often. We get to the other side when we use it, but I've had a few swims where it really came to the rescue when I missed a feed. So that's really great. And when we go to when there is a plantoon or somewhere we can feed, if it's in cold water, definitely a good idea. If it could be warmer, I know Derek likes to keep us tea with honey. That's actually fantastic, because it does warm you up a bit. You also want to get that taste out of your mouth to see, but you can get, just by swirling a liquid in your mouth with a little bit of glucose, helps with the whole energy regulation as well. And then train to have a feed, but also train to miss a feed. That's also quite important. So have a plan, but if something happens, like I know that's also happened to me before, where there was a plantoon, but I completely missed it because the current took me the other way. I had to have a plan that my whole swim didn't fall apart because I didn't have my feed. I hope that makes sense.
And what's your view on, was it the maltodextrin debate? Should one look to include that in one's feeding strategy, or is that not for everybody? I know there's sort of diverse opinions within the dietary world. What's your view?
Yeah, and the reason for that, Tom, is because we are all a little bit different, and we have to see what works for us. For me, it is a good idea. Maltodextrin is something. It's like it's not so sweet, but it does have a bit of a slower release, so you can get quite a bit of glucose from it. And for swimming, definitely we need to have some carbohydrates sparing. We need to have some carbohydrates available. So I think that's still a way to go, is the maltodextrin drinks. And
then and you mentioned gels and stuff. I mean, are they a good idea? I also heard conflicting information around them. Should one look to feed on gels throughout one's swim, or do you just keep them in reserve just in case?
Because gels normally need to chase it with a liquid. So if you're going to be doing a whole lot of gels, that's by itself, it's not a good idea. So I normally look for gels that doesn't have too much caffeine, because caffeine is okay to take before your swim. It can delay fatigue later on, but taking too much caffeine during your swim is not a good idea. Some people can do, it's also a little bit genetic. So some people can take some caffeine during their swim, but sometimes these gels are very, very high in caffeine. And so that's not a good idea. And then you can also find ones which got a little bit of B vitamins and some sugars in it. So it will give you that extra nutrition if you take a gel during your swim. Another thing are these little bars. They're called race food. I think far bars and fast bars. They have a little bit of the far bars are not so sweet, and if you've seen them, these little bars that you can also push in your costume, and you can, if you want to eat something rather than drink, they also work quite well if you don't like the gels.
Okay, all right. And what happens when one skips a feed? Are you putting yourself at risk for cramp?
Cramp is a whole discussion by itself, but so cramp is interesting. We don't actually, I don't know if Sean or Neil has an opinion, but I don't always know why people cramp. I guess nutrition will play a role. And to me, personally, I think magnesium is a big thing. So I even experiment with these magnesium oils that you can rub on before your swim. And that seems to, for some people, it helps to reduce cramp. And also taking some magnesium, especially leading up to your race, sort of the week before, taking some magnesium in the evenings is better because it also helps you sleep. That might also help to prevent cramping.
All right. I just want to ask Dr. Sean.
Can I just jump in on the cramping?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Just if you're a swimmer and you get systemic cramps, that's going to be the dietary side of things. If you repetitively get cramps in one particular muscle, so if you're a swimmer and you get a cramp in your calf and it's always the right calf or right hamstring or a particular muscle, that's something you can look at conditioning wise, because it might be technique. So speak to your coach. So if you're kicking from the knee rather than from your hips, you can speak to your swim coach to say, can you just look at my technique? Am I kicking properly? Am I pulling properly? What am I doing? You may also find that that individual's got a big kick on the one side, so it could be an asymmetrical kick, and then you want to look at changing that in your swim training or with the bio or physio. You can go and you can look at strength training exercises to, again, look at reducing fatigue in that particular area or over-reliance on that particular muscle.
Okay, thanks. That's very, very helpful. Yeah, so I was going to ask something, Dr. Sean, I want to touch a little bit on hypothermia. It's also another risk that we get into when one's cold water swimming. So how does one know one is getting too cold? We obviously can feel a bit cold in the cold Atlantic, but when does one know one's getting too cold, and or can one tell, or do we need to use our buddies and swim observers to play that role?
Yeah, thanks. Another whole other topic. I think the more experienced swimmers are better at this than the newbies, because they know when they're starting to get cold. And the real problem is the more cold one gets, the less one is able to make decisions, all decisions, including deciding that you're getting hypothermic. So I think this falls more to the observers and the people on the boat, the seconds. And just in very quick summary, basically people are getting cold when they're slowing down a lot, when their technique is changing, when they can't feed or point or swim straight, and when they can't interact or think properly, even if it's with hand signals, interacting with the boat, and basically they really aren't lucid anymore. And when it becomes very dangerous, it's this kind of slow or automatous swimming. They're going into automatic mode in slow motion, and they've got to get out of the water.
Okay. And then just I think maybe an interesting question that's been asked a few times. Should one wrap up before a big swim, or should one let one's body sort of get used to the cold air before one gets in?
Okay, I think that is controversial, and the cold water swimmers and ice swimmers do have their own techniques. But from my side, I think the biggest problem is people who stand around in cold wind in their speedos and get cold before they get in. All of us humans, we've got a limited reserve of how much we can tolerate and how much cold we can tolerate. If you're going to stand around for 10, 15, 20 minutes before getting into the cold water in the speedo, you're already getting cold. And we see people shivering before they get into the water. That's a problem. So people should not be doing that. And people should also not be doing the opposite. You shouldn't be getting straight out of a hot heated car into very cold water. Your system doesn't have time to adapt. So I would say anything from loose, warm clothing, take it off, get in the water. So don't stand around in your speedo for too long, and don't go from very hot to very cold. It doesn't work. And there are other risks associated with that, like setting off cardiac arrhythmias. Okay, great, thanks. I'm just going to move over to some questions now. It's got some interesting questions coming through. Please feel free to add those questions to the chat, and I'll hopefully get to them. So I've got one question here. Weight. What does weight play? What sort of role does weight play in doing, say, a Robben Island swim? Is that quite important, or does one just get used to the cold ocean and should one look to put on a few extra pounds? Is that for me or the dietitian? I don't know.
No, that's for you. It's for you.
Okay. Look, from my side, I think there's no doubt that that this is one sport with a bit of a higher BMI or comfort definitely helps. And if you look at all deep sea mammals and mammals that dive, none of them are anorexic. They've got a higher BMI and a high content of adipose, and it's part of thermoregulation. So one doesn't have to be necessarily big, but then you've got to be quick if you're going to be doing short swims. If you're going to be doing long swims in cold water, one might well have to bulk up. And some of the swimmers on this panel have already done that successfully. So ideally, in summary, ideally you want to have a fairly high BMI and be fast. That's the perfect open water swimmer.
Fat and fast. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Can I say something about that quickly, Tom? Can I say something about it?
Sure.
So I know that that is the thing that people, but I know a lot of very skinny swimmers who can stay in the water longer than I can. So there is some other physiology involved, and I believe strongly that there's a lot of genetics involved, because some people can just, like altitude, I think altitude might be a similar thing. Some people can and some people can't. And so we have these, in our cells, we have this, what we call uncoupling protein. So it's a way for our body to release heat. And so some people can just tolerate cold better than others. There's obviously a lot of other things, but I think it's not just about body weight. So don't feel like, oh, no, I'll never be open water swim because I don't want to be fat. So just some hope for those people out there.
Okay.
Just
All right.
From my side on that, Tom, if I can jump in.
Yeah.
So when I started in cold water swimming back 2006, I was introduced by Buff to come and try Camps Bay, and I struggled. I really, really struggled in the cold, and I used to shiver like crazy. I didn't enjoy it, and I think you develop a memory bank of cold, and then you start knowing what you're confident with, what you're capable with. You start testing the boundaries a little bit more. I think the most important thing to realize is that cold is a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. You're not going to be able to tolerate cold temperatures overnight. So there's a huge psychological component as well. Having a good attitude towards the cold, not rushing in and hyperventilating and doing very on-trend kind of breathing methods beforehand and like panicking when you get into the water. I think getting in cool, calm, collected, no pun intended. But you'll see even the experienced guys, the guys who are ice swimmers, they get in, they're squealing when they get into a Camps Bay water temperature that's quite cold. If it's like under 14, they're going to be standing there like the old timers are standing on the shore, kind of dipping their toes in. So everyone feels the cold. I think your attitude towards cold makes a big difference. So a skinny swimmer who's got a good positive attitude, who isn't panicking and doesn't have adrenaline surging through the system, can tolerate cold for a lot longer than they think. But you've got to build up to it slowly. So it's not just a overnight thing.
Okay, great. A question for Dr. Sean. High blood pressure and ice water swimming, good idea?
Yeah, I think this is one thing where one really must be careful, and it's a definite risk. So when you go into cold water, and especially so-called ice water under 5 degrees centigrade, you get quite a strong vasoconstriction. So your body moves the blood from the skin and the limbs more to the core, heart, lung, from the skin to heart, lung, brain, and your blood pressure goes up significantly. So much so that we've pretty much stopped doing blood pressure tests just before ice swimming, because we'd have to exclude too many people. We do it on the medical. So if one suffers from high blood pressure, that is actually a risk, and one needs to consult with one's doctor or physician before getting into that, and definitely work one's way into colder and colder water, not go straight from the gym to an ice swim. You'll get into trouble. And the real risk there is stroke. You can get a stroke.
Okay, and the wrong sort of stroke for swimming, yeah. Anyway.
The intracerebral catastrophic event stroke.
Right, we've got one more question, I think, and then we probably need to look to wrap it up. We've done our 45 minutes, but a question for Annelie. Controversial, I have to say, but let's see. Talking about IVs of vitamins, such as vitamin D, C, and zinc. Is that better than daily pills? Should one be connecting to an IV to get one's vitamins?
You definitely not get vitamin D from his IV drip. But there are some, there is a place for vitamin drips if you have somebody who knows what they're doing, but you don't have to have IV. Your body is equipped to absorb it from your gut, unless if you have a lot of issues, and then you should probably not be swimming. So I think that you can, first prize is from your food, definitely. Second prize is to supplement it, to try and add things that you are deficient, and definitely get some help on that. Because like I said earlier, just because things are natural doesn't mean it's it's not going to do any harm. You can cause problems. So definitely food first, tablets, and getting help to make sure you get something that's the right balance for you and what you need. And then drips, definitely a last resort, going to somebody who really knows what they're doing. And they sometimes help to boost your immune system for sure. Things like B vitamins like B12 and vitamin C, but there can be problems with that. Can I just also, I wanted to say something earlier about the seasickness. Something that's quite interesting is when you get seasick, you build up, it can sometimes be also building up a lot of histamine, which we also can, and so taking quite a high dose of vitamin C, which helps to stabilize or to stabilize the amount of histamine you produce, which is also a bit of a stress response, can also help. So you can also try that as a seasick remedy, which is not going to make you feel fatigued. So that's something to try and can't do too much harm. So
yeah, most just to jump in there, most of the anti-nausea pills, antiemetics for motion sickness are basically antihistamines.
So you can use nutrition, nutrition, like there's something called quercetin as well, which you get in things like apples and onions, and then vitamin C, and then there's a few other things like vitamin B6 as well. So if you tend to get seasick, and especially when you're stressed, it can get worse because it will activate that histamine. That's something you can experiment with, see if it helps you.
All right, so one last question. He's just got in. Albert wants to know, he's maybe this one for Neil. He's a breaststroker. He wants to do some long distance like a Robben Island crossing. Is there anything especially important that he needs to remember from a strength perspective? I'm talking to you mainly as a coach, Neil, but is there something special that he needs to remember about doing breaststroke, apart from the fact that he needs to prepare for 4 hours in the water?
So yeah, it's a long swim. So thanks for the question. It's a difficult stroke for a long distance like that, but it's not impossible. I mean, we've got people who've done butterfly for the crossing. My recommendation would be to work on the glide. So if you're very streamlined and you have a long glide, it's going to get across. We'll cut down on the time. But it's quite a leg dominant stroke. So you've got to be wary of your adductors, so your inner thigh, and making sure that you don't go into a cramp there, because I don't know if you've been in cold water for a long period of time, one of the first areas that starts to give up on you is your legs. And you'll find that most people start becoming very arm dominant with their pull. That's very tricky with a breaststroke pull. It's not impossible. You have to have very strong pecs and biceps, and you can pull yourself along. But it is a tricky stroke for cold and for long distance, but it's not impossible. So I would say work on your glide. Make sure you've got good adductor conditioning. So on the yes/no machines, you can spend some time in the gym working on the conditioning there. Ramp up the number of repetitions so you get endurance. And then, some flexibility as well. Just work on stretching out your adductors and spend time in the cold. So Sea Point Pavilion Pool, see what your legs feel like in cold water, and see if you can do some leg only lengths just to strengthen up that so you fatigue resistant.
All right. Okay, so thank you to the panel. Thanks, Annelie. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Dr. Sean. Really appreciate the time that you spent with us today. I think it's been quite enlightening. I've learned a lot. I'm sure my fellow guests have as well. And I'd like to say, if anybody wants to get in contact with the specialists that we have here, please get in contact with us. We'll happily pass you on to them if needed. So, I think that would be good to sort of continue the conversation if you want to speak quite personally about some of the challenges that you're having. But I'd like to thank you very, very much for the session. If there is interest, we'd love to hear from you for potential follow-up sessions, maybe in a few months' time, where we maybe have a bit more of a deep dive on, excuse the pun, on diet or maybe hypothermia. We're thinking about that, or maybe training, getting a little bit more into that. We sort of skated over some of the topics very quickly, so my fault, but I think we got a good feeling for what you need to do when you're preparing for a long swim. So thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for joining us. For those who took out membership just to join this talk, thanks to those. Thanks to them. You can still take out membership. If you haven't taken out membership, you can do that through www.cldsa.co.za. And we will be back, I think, probably in about 6 weeks, as we've been doing over the last few months. And we will let you know who the speaker is going to be then. So thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.